Maybe it's time we put Grandma in a home. She's becoming a burden we can't afford to carry anymore. The words hit me like shattered glass. Standing in the hallway of my own house, the house I'd paid off 30 years ago, I watched my granddaughter Victoria gesture toward me with her wine glass while her investment banker fiancé nodded sympathetically. My son Thomas sat silent, not even bothering to defend me. Then Victoria's fiancé, Marcus Chen, went pale. Wait, Eleanor Whitmore? You're the Eleanor Whitmore? The silent partner behind Chen Ventures Capital? Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I ended up being called a burden in my own home, the home where I'd raised 3 children alone after my husband died, and how I made them all realize that some burdens are too expensive to discard. 2 hours earlier, I'd been in the kitchen preparing dinner for what was supposed to be a celebration, Victoria's engagement party, intimate, family only, exactly as she'd requested. At 67 years old, I'd learned that sometimes the best gift you can give your family is your time and your cooking, 2 things I'd perfected over 4 decades. "Grandma, the roast smells amazing," Victoria had said, breezing into the kitchen in a dress that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all, sweetheart. It's not every day my eldest granddaughter gets engaged." What I didn't tell her was that the trouble had included hiring a professional chef to teach me the recipe, paying for premium ingredients I'd normally never buy, and spending 2 full days preparing. The total cost was roughly $800, not that anyone would know or care. Thomas appeared in the doorway, my oldest son, now 45 and graying at the temples. "Mom, we need to talk later about your living situation." My hands paused over the potatoes I was mashing. My living situation? "Just something to discuss, not tonight. Let's focus on Victoria's happy news." But as I stood in that hallway an hour later, listening to my granddaughter call me a burden, I realized that later had arrived much sooner than expected. The thing about being a 67-year-old widow is that people assume you're helpless, invisible, and living on a fixed income that barely covers cat food and medication. What they don't know can absolutely destroy them. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Marcus stammered, his champagne glass trembling. "I had no idea. Victoria never mentioned—" "Mentioned what, Marcus?" Victoria's voice was sharp with confusion. She looked between us, her perfect engagement smile faltering. "That your grandmother is Eleanor Whitmore, the Eleanor Whitmore." My son Thomas stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against my hardwood floors. "Mom, what's he talking about?" I smiled, the same calm smile I'd used in 100 board meetings that no one in my family knew I'd attended. "Marcus, why don't you explain it to them? I'd love to hear how you describe my role in your firm." Marcus looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Mrs. Whitmore is the silent partner in Chen Ventures Capital. She's been our primary investor for the past 15 years. Her capital contributions represent approximately 60% of our operational funding." The silence in my living room was deafening. "Grandma," Victoria whispered, "you're rich?" "Comfortable," I corrected gently. "The word you're looking for is comfortable." Thomas found his voice. "How is this possible? You live in this old house. You shop at discount stores. You clip coupons, for God's sake." "Yes, I do all those things, because that's how people build and maintain wealth, Thomas, by not spending money unnecessarily." I walked over to my favorite armchair, the one I'd reupholstered myself 3 times over the years, and sat down. Perhaps we should have that conversation about my living situation now. The path to that moment had started 67 years earlier, when I was born to a family that had nothing but debts and broken dreams. I grew up in South Chicago in a 2-bedroom apartment with 7 siblings, wearing hand-me-downs and eating government cheese. But I had one advantage, my brain. Mathematics came to me like breathing. By 16, I was working as a bookkeeper for a local grocery store. By 22, I was managing the books for 3 small businesses. By 25, I'd married Richard Whitmore, a good man who worked construction and wanted a family more than fortune. We had 3 children in 5 years, Thomas, Jennifer, and Michael. Then Richard died in a construction accident when I was 39, leaving me with a small life insurance payout and 3 teenagers who needed college educations. What no one knew, not even my children, was what I did with that insurance money. Instead of spending it on a bigger house or nicer things, I invested every penny I could spare. I started with stocks, moved into real estate, and eventually became known in certain financial circles as the silent partner, a mysterious investor who never wanted credit, publicity, or board positions, just results. I lived in the same modest house, drove the same modest car, shopped at the same modest stores, and over 43 years, I turned $50,000 into $47 million. Now, sitting in my living room with my family staring at me like I'd grown a second head, I decided it was time to explain a few things. Marcus, how much does Chen Ventures Capital manage in total assets? He cleared his throat. Approximately $180 million. And how much of that represents my initial investment in growth? Roughly $108 million. Victoria made a small sound like she'd been punched. $108 million? Give or take a few million, depending on market fluctuations, I said calmly. But let's return to your earlier statement about putting me in a home because I'm a burden you can't afford to carry anymore. Grandma, I didn't mean... You absolutely meant it, Victoria. You looked at me, this elderly woman in your way, taking up space in a valuable property, and decided I was disposable, an inconvenience to be managed. Thomas finally found his voice. Mom, we didn't know about the money. We thought you were struggling. Why did you think I was struggling, Thomas? He gestured around the room. You live like you're poor. This furniture is ancient. Your clothes are from 15 years ago. You never travel, never buy anything nice. And from that, you concluded I was poor rather than frugal? My daughter Jennifer spoke up for the first time. She'd been silent in the corner, processing everything. We were trying to help, Mom. Thomas and I have been talking about whether we should pool money to get you into assisted living. Assisted living that I don't need and can't afford, you thought. Yes, Thomas sat back down heavily. We were planning to approach you next month about selling this house and using the proceeds for your care. This house that's worth approximately $800,000 in the current market. Mom, how do you even know that? Because I had it appraised last month, Thomas. Unlike you, I keep track of my assets. Victoria was still staring at Marcus like he'd betrayed her somehow. You knew my grandmother was wealthy and you never told me? I knew Eleanor Whitmore was our primary investor. I didn't know she was your grandmother until literally 2 minutes ago. You always just called her grandma in conversation. Because that's who she is, Victoria's voice rose with frustration. She's supposed to be the sweet old lady who bakes cookies and sends birthday cards. I am that person, Victoria. I just happen to also be a person with excellent investment strategies and 43 years of financial discipline. My youngest son, Michael, arrived 30 minutes later, having driven from his law office downtown. Thomas had called him with an urgent family emergency, and Michael had rearranged his entire afternoon. Mom, he walked in, still wearing his suit, looking concerned. What's wrong? Thomas said there was some kind of crisis. The crisis, I said calmly, is that my family has discovered I'm not the helpless old woman they thought I was. Michael looked confused until Thomas filled him in on the Chen Ventures Capital revelation. I watched my youngest son's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally something that looked almost like betrayal. You never told us, he said quietly. These whole years you let us think you were barely getting by? I never lied to you, Michael, but you never corrected us when we worried about you. Would you have worried less if you'd known I was wealthy, or would you have started asking for money? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jennifer answered first. We wouldn't have asked for money, Mom. We're not like that. Aren't you? Jennifer, 3 years ago you asked me to co-sign a loan for your husband's business expansion. Do you remember what you said? She went pale. I knew you couldn't invest directly, but a co-signature wouldn't cost you anything unless something went wrong. And when something did go wrong and the bank came after me for the $45,000 your husband defaulted on, what did you say? I said we'd pay you back eventually. Except you never did. I paid that debt in full to protect my credit rating. Did you think I used my Social Security check? Jennifer started crying silently. Thomas jumped in defensively. That was different. You agreed to help. Yes, I did, just like I agreed to help when you needed $20,000 for your daughter's college tuition, and when Michael needed $15,000 for his bar exam preparation and living expenses, and when Jennifer needed $30,000 to prevent foreclosure on her first house. I looked at each of my children in turn. Over the past 20 years, I've given my children approximately $380,000 in various forms of assistance, not loans, gifts, money you never had to repay because I told you not to worry about it. We didn't know you had it to give, Michael said. We thought you were sacrificing your own security to help us. And that made it acceptable, watching your mother sacrifice herself for your benefit? None of them had an answer for that. Victoria finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Grandma, I'm sorry for what I said about the home. You thought I was old, useless, and in the way, and you felt comfortable saying so in my own home because you assumed I had no power to object. That's not fair. I was talking to Marcus about our future, about whether we could afford to take care of you if you got sick. Take care of me with what money, Victoria? She hesitated. We thought between all of us the family could contribute. Contribute to my care from the inheritances you were all expecting to receive when I die? The room went absolutely silent. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You all assumed I'd live modestly, save what little I had, and leave you enough to make your lives easier when I finally had the decency to die and get out of your way. Mom, that's not... Thomas started. Thomas, please don't insult my intelligence. You're 45 years old with a $200,000 salary, and you've been asking me for money since you were 30. Why do you think that is? He had no answer. I stood up and walked to my desk in the corner of the room, retrieving a folder I'd prepared just for this occasion. Inside were financial records I'd been keeping for 2 decades, documenting every loan, every gift, every instance where my children had come to me with their hands out. This is what financial dependence looks like, I said, placing the folder on the coffee table. You all have good jobs, nice homes, and expensive lifestyles, but somehow you've never quite managed to build your own financial security. Why? Because you knew Grandma would always help. Jennifer wiped her eyes. We didn't mean to take advantage. But you did take advantage, and worse, you resented me for allowing it. You saw my willingness to help as weakness rather than love. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to apologize for my firm's role in keeping this information from your family. If I'd known... If you'd known what, Marcus? You've maintained excellent confidentiality, exactly as I requested. My issue isn't with you. Then what is your issue? Thomas demanded, his frustration finally boiling over. That we didn't realize you were secretly rich, that we accepted your help when you offered it. What exactly are we being punished for? You're not being punished, Thomas. You're experiencing consequences. There's a difference. What consequences? I smiled, and I saw several people in the room flinch at the expression. Well, let's start with the obvious ones. Marcus, I'd like to discuss Victoria's employment at Chen Ventures. Victoria's head snapped up. What about my employment? You started working in the marketing department 6 months ago, correct? Yes, Marcus hired me as a favor to our family. Actually, Marcus said carefully, you were hired because Mrs. Whitmore insisted we create a position for you. She funded your entire salary through a special allocation from her investment returns. Victoria stared in horror at me. You've been paying for my job? Someone had to. Your qualifications were inadequate for the salary you demanded, but I thought real-world experience might teach you some humility. I turned to Marcus. How has that been working out? Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable. Victoria is learning. That's professional speak for incompetent, isn't it? Grandma, Victoria protested. Marcus, effective immediately, Victoria's special salary allocation is terminated. If she wishes to continue working at Chen Ventures, she'll do so at the standard entry-level marketing rate. I believe that's about $45,000 annually? $42,000, Marcus confirmed quietly. I make $95,000. You made $95,000, past tense. Now, let's discuss the house. Thomas leaned forward. What about the house? The house you wanted me to sell so I could move into assisted living. I've been thinking about that suggestion, and I believe you're right. Everyone looked confused. I should sell this house. It's much too large for one person, and the property taxes are quite substantial. I've received several offers from developers interested in the lot. Mom, you can't be serious. This is your home. My home where I've been called a burden? My home where my family gathered to discuss how to dispose of me efficiently? No, I think selling is the right choice. Where will you go? Asked Michael. I've been looking at condominiums downtown, something modern with excellent security, a doorman, and most importantly, no guest rooms for family members who might want to stay over. The implication wasn't subtle. You're cutting us off, Thomas said flatly. This is about revenge for one stupid comment? No, Thomas, this is about self-respect. For 67 years, I've put everyone else's needs before my own. I've sacrificed, saved, and gone without so my family could have more. And tonight, I discovered that despite everything I've done, you all see me as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected. The meeting broke up shortly after that, with everyone leaving except Marcus, who lingered nervously by the door. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to apologize again for the awkwardness tonight. Marcus, you did nothing wrong. Come sit down. He perched on the edge of my sofa, looking like a man waiting for execution. Tell me honestly, how is Victoria really performing at work? He sighed. She's not terrible, but she's not good either. She treats the job like a social club, shows up late, leaves early, and spends most of her time planning her wedding instead of working. And you kept her employed because of my investment? Yes. I'm sorry, but yes. Don't apologize for being honest, Marcus. That's more than my family has been with me in years. I poured both of us tea from the pot I'd prepared earlier. How is your firm performing otherwise? Excellently. Your investment strategy has been brilliant. We're seeing consistent 12 to 15% annual returns, and our client base has expanded significantly. Good. Then my investment will remain unchanged, but Victoria's employment is her own responsibility now. Understood. He hesitated. May I ask what you're really trying to accomplish here? With your family, I mean. I'm trying to teach them a lesson I should have taught them 30 years ago, that love isn't transactional and respect can't be caught. 3 days later, my phone started ringing. First Thomas, then Jennifer, then Michael, all wanting to talk things through and understand what happened. I ignored the first dozen calls, letting them experience what it felt like to be dismissed as inconvenient. When I finally answered on day 4, it was Jennifer calling. "Mom, please, we need to talk about this. You can't just cut us off without explanation." I explained everything quite clearly, Jennifer. You all decided I was a burden. I've simply chosen to relieve you of that burden. We didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did you mean it then, Jennifer? Silence. That's what I thought. Jennifer, let me ask you something. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing, not to ask for money or help or advice, but just to talk? More silence. I can tell you when you last asked me for money. It was 6 weeks ago when you needed $5,000 to cover your daughter's dance competition expenses. I sent you a check the same day, but I can't remember the last time you called just to hear my voice. Mom, that's not fair. You know I love you.
Do I? Because love isn't just words, Jennifer. It's actions. It's respect. It's recognizing that the person you claim to love has feelings and needs and dignity. So what do you want from us? Groveling public apologies? I want you to understand what you've taken for granted, and I want you to experience what life is like without the safety net you've been using me as for decades. I hung up before she could respond. The real test came 2 weeks later when Thomas called with genuine panic in his voice. "Mom, I need your help. I know you're mad at us, but this is serious." "What's wrong?" "Victoria broke off her engagement with Marcus. She quit her job at Shen Ventures and moved back home with us. She's threatening to sue Marcus for some kind of discrimination or wrongful termination. I don't even understand what happened." I sighed. What happened is that Victoria discovered she couldn't do the job without special accommodations funded by her grandmother's money. Marcus reduced her salary to appropriate levels, and she decided being entry-level wasn't suitable for her self-image. "Can you talk to her? She won't listen to us." "Why would she listen to me, Thomas? I'm just a burden to be managed, remember?" "Mom, please, that was just Victoria being thoughtless. She didn't mean anything by it." Victoria meant every word, and she meant it because you raised her to believe that elderly people are disposable and inconvenient. Where do you think she learned that attitude? "That's not, we never—" He stopped, unable to finish the denial. "Thomas, you called me 2 hours before Victoria's engagement party to discuss my living situation. You were planning to convince me to sell my home and move into assisted living I don't need, using my own money to fund it so you could inherit this property sooner." "How did you know that?" "Because I'm not senile, Thomas. I'm old, not stupid. I heard you and Jennifer discussing it on the phone 3 weeks ago when you didn't realize I was in the next room." The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly 30 seconds. "We thought we were helping," he finally said weakly. "You thought you were managing an inconvenient asset. There's a difference." Victoria called me directly that evening, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Grandma, you ruined my life. Marcus broke off my engagement because you told him I was incompetent." "I told Marcus the truth, Victoria. What he chose to do with that information was his decision, not mine. He said he couldn't marry someone who wasn't honest about their qualifications and who only got hired because of family connections. He said it showed poor character." "It does show poor character." "I can't believe you're taking his side over mine." "I'm not taking sides, Victoria. I'm observing consequences. You lied on your resume, performed poorly at work, and when your special circumstances were removed, you quit rather than prove yourself capable." "I didn't lie on my resume." "You claim to have experience with financial analysis software you'd never used. You said you'd completed internships that never existed. Marcus showed me your application materials when you first applied." "Why didn't you say something then?"
Because I was hoping you'd grow into the position. I was hoping that real responsibility would teach you the work ethic your parents never instilled. Victoria's voice broke. You hate me. I love you, Victoria, but I don't respect your choices. And right now, you're proving that you'd rather blame others for your failures than take responsibility for your own life. What am I supposed to do now? I'm 26 years old with no job, no fiancé, and nowhere to go. You're supposed to do what millions of people do every day. You get another job, you build a career based on actual skills, and you learn that the world doesn't owe you anything just because you show up. This is all your fault for cutting off my salary. No, Victoria, this is all your fault for never learning to stand on your own 2 feet. I hung up before she could respond. By week 3, the family dynamics had shifted dramatically. Thomas stopped calling entirely. Jennifer called once more to tell me I was being cruel and unreasonable, then didn't contact me again. Michael, my youngest, was the only one who showed real introspection. He appeared at my door on a Saturday morning, carrying coffee and pastries. Mom, can we talk? Really talk? I let him in, curious about what he had to say. We sat in my living room, the same room where everything fell apart 3 weeks ago, and Michael spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about financial dependence and taking you for granted, and I realized you're right. About which part? All of it. I'm 40 years old, Mom. I'm a successful attorney making $180,000 a year, and somehow I still think of you as my backup plan, my safety net, the person who'll fix things if I mess up. I sipped my coffee, letting him continue. Do you know what my therapist said when I told her about all this? You're seeing a therapist? Started 2 weeks ago. Best decision I've made in years. He smiled weakly. She said that children who never learn to fail safely never learn to succeed authentically. Your therapist sounds wise. She wants to meet you, actually. She said anyone who could build a $47 million fortune in silence while raising 3 children alone must have extraordinary discipline and intelligence. I'm not extraordinary, Michael. I'm just careful. No, Mom, you're extraordinary, and we've been treating you like you're ordinary, like you're just the nice old lady who makes dinner and sends birthday cards. I felt tears prickling my eyes. Thank you for saying that. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I want you to know that I understand what I've done, what we've all done. We turned you into a resource instead of recognizing you as a person. Michael's visit changed something fundamental in my approach to the situation. I'd been angry, hurt, and determined to teach my family a lesson, but his genuine remorse and willingness to face his own shortcomings made me realize that punishment wasn't the goal, growth was. I called Marcus Chen the following Monday. Marcus, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss Victoria's situation. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. When would you like to meet? This afternoon, if possible. And Marcus, I'd like you to consider rehiring Victoria under very specific conditions. He was silent for a moment. I'm listening. The meeting took place in Marcus's downtown office, a sleek space that reflected the success of Chen Ventures Capital. Victoria arrived looking defensive and angry, clearly expecting another confrontation. Victoria, I've asked Marcus to consider giving you another chance at your position. Really? Under specific conditions, I continued. First, you'll start at the entry-level salary of $42,000 annually with no special accommodations. Second, you'll undergo a 3-month probationary period where your performance will be evaluated weekly. Third, you'll complete a certification program in financial analysis at your own expense. Grandma, I can't afford, which brings me to the 4th condition. I'll loan you the money for the certification program at standard interest rates. You'll repay me monthly from your salary. If you fail to complete the program or are terminated during probation, the entire loan becomes due immediately. She stared at me. You're making me prove myself. I'm giving you the opportunity to prove yourself. The choice is yours. Victoria looked at Marcus, then back at me. What if I fail? Then you fail, and you learn from it, and you try something else. That's what adults do. She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, I'll do it. Excellent. Marcus, do you have the paperwork prepared? He smiled. I do, actually. I had a feeling this conversation was coming. As Victoria signed her new employment contract, I watched her carefully. She looked smaller somehow, less entitled and more uncertain, but there was something else in her expression too, determination. Maybe she'd succeed, maybe she'd fail, but for the first time in her life, the outcome would depend entirely on her own efforts. 2 months later, I hosted a family dinner at my home. Not a celebration or special occasion, just a Sunday meal where we could all try to rebuild what had been broken. Thomas arrived first, looking uncomfortable. Mom, the house looks different. I had it deep cleaned and redecorated. It was time. Jennifer came next with her husband, both of them subdued. Michael arrived last, bringing his therapist's recommendation for a family counselor. We sat down to dinner, a simple meal I'd prepared myself without any expensive ingredients or professional help, and for the first time in years, we had an honest conversation. I want to apologize, Thomas began, setting down his fork, for all of it, for taking you for granted, for assuming you had nothing but what we could see, for treating you like an obligation instead of a person. Jennifer nodded. I'm sorry too, Mom. I've been thinking about all the times you helped me, and I realized I never once asked if you could afford it. I just assumed you'd handle it somehow. I appreciate your apologies, I said carefully, but apologies are just words. What matters is whether your behavior changes. It will, Michael promised. We've all been talking, and we want to make things right. How? Thomas pulled out a folder. We've calculated how much money we've borrowed from you over the years. It's approximately $380,000, like you said. We want to set up a repayment plan. I looked at the papers he slid across the table. They'd created a detailed spreadsheet showing every loan, every gift, every instance where they'd taken my money, and they'd proposed a payment schedule that would take them 15 years to complete. You can't afford this, I said, reading the numbers. We'll make it work, Jennifer insisted. We need to make it work. Why? The question seemed to confuse them. Because we owe you, Thomas said. Because it's the right thing to do. And if I forgave the debt, if I told you right now that you don't have to repay a single dollar, what would you do? They looked at each other, unsure how to answer. Would you immediately ask for more money? Would you go back to seeing me as a resource to exploit? Or would you finally learn to value our relationship beyond its financial benefits? We'd value the relationship, Michael said quietly, because that's what we should have been doing all along. I folded the repayment plan and set it aside. Keep your money, invest it in your own futures, build your own financial security. Mom, we can't. You can and you will, but understand this. I'm not your bank anymore. I'm not your safety net. I'm not the person you call when you've made poor financial decisions and need someone to bail you out. Then what are you? Jennifer asked. I'm your mother. And if you want a relationship with me, it will be based on love and respect, not money and obligation. The changes were gradual but real. Thomas stopped asking for loans. Jennifer started calling just to talk, sometimes for hours about nothing important. Michael brought his kids over for visits that didn't involve requests for college fund contributions. And Victoria, surprisingly, thrived under her new conditions. 3 months into her probationary period, Marcus reported that she was performing exceptionally well. She's like a different person, he told me during one of our quarterly investment reviews. Focused, dedicated, actually doing the work instead of coasting on connections. Sometimes people need to be given the opportunity to fail before they can learn to succeed, I said. Is that what you were doing? Giving her the opportunity to fail? I was giving her the opportunity to be real. Everything else was up to her. 6 months after the engagement party disaster, Victoria asked to meet me for coffee. We sat in a downtown cafe, and for the first time since she was a child, I saw genuine maturity in her eyes. "Grandma, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." "Marcus and I have been talking again, not dating, just talking, and he said something that made me realize how much I'd messed up." "What did he say?" "He said that when he first met me, he thought I was this fascinating woman with potential, but then he discovered I was all surface, no substance. I'd never worked for anything in my life, never had to prove myself, never developed actual skills. And now? Now I'm terrified every day that I'll screw up and lose this job, but I'm also proud of myself for the first time ever. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. I wanted to thank you for cutting me off, for making me struggle, for forcing me to become a real person instead of just a pretty face with family connections." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're welcome, sweetheart, but you did the hard work. I just stopped enabling you to avoid it." "Marcus and I are having dinner next week, as friends, not as anything romantic, but he said he'd like to get to know the real me, whoever that turns out to be." "That's wonderful, Victoria. I might fail, you know, at the job, at whatever happens with Marcus, at all of it. You might, but at least you'll fail as yourself, not some pretend version of who you think you should be." 1 year later, I sold my house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I bought a beautiful condominium downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Lake Michigan that took my breath away every morning. The house sold for $950,000, significantly more than the $800,000 I'd mentioned at the engagement party. The buyers were a young family with 3 children, and I liked knowing that new memories would be created in those rooms. My children were surprisingly supportive of the move. Thomas helped pack boxes, Jennifer organized the estate sale, Michael handled all the legal paperwork. They showed up not because they expected anything in return, but because they wanted to help. On my last night in the old house, I walked through the empty rooms remembering everything they'd witnessed. 3 children growing up, a husband dying too young, decades of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary moments that had somehow added up to a life. But I wasn't sad. I was excited. At 68 years old, I was finally living for myself. The engagement party that changed everything felt like ancient history by the time Victoria and Marcus got married 18 months later. They'd taken their time rebuilding trust, and when Marcus proposed the second time, it was to a woman who'd earned his respect through hard work and genuine character development. I paid for nothing, not the venue, not the dress, not even my own hotel room. I attended as a guest, not a benefactor, and it was the most enjoyable wedding I'd ever experienced. During the reception, Victoria gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. 2 years ago, she said, standing beside her new husband, I was a spoiled, entitled person who thought the world owed me success without effort. Then my grandmother did the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me. She cut me off. The guests laughed, thinking it was a joke. I'm serious. She stopped enabling my laziness and forced me to become a real person instead of just a pretty face with family connections. She raised her glass toward me. To my grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who loved me enough to let me fail and believed in me enough to try again. Everything good in my life today exists because you refused to keep rescuing me from myself. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was too busy wiping tears from my face. After the reception, Marcus pulled me aside. Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted you to know that Victoria has been promoted to senior analyst. She earned it entirely on her own merit. I never doubted she could, Marcus. I just needed her to believe it herself. She does now, and we have you to thank for that. He paused. Also, I wanted to discuss expanding your investment portfolio. We've identified several opportunities that align with your risk tolerance and long-term goals. Email me the details. But Marcus, no more family favors. Victoria succeeds or fails on her own now. Understood. Though between you and me, I don't think you need to worry about her failing anymore. Thomas found me standing by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline lit up against the evening sky. Mom, can I tell you something? Of course. I was wrong about everything, about you, about what you needed, about what family means. He stood beside me, both of us watching the city. I spent 45 years thinking I was taking care of you by worrying about your finances and your living situation, but the truth is, you were taking care of all of us while we were too blind to see it. You weren't blind, Thomas. You just saw what you expected to see. I expected to see a helpless old woman because that's what society tells us elderly people are. But you're not helpless. You never were. No, I wasn't, but I let you believe it because I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do, sacrifice themselves so their children could feel capable and strong. That was wrong of us to accept. It was wrong of me to offer. I turned to face him. I taught you that my needs didn't matter by always putting yours first, and then I resented you for believing what I'd spent decades teaching you. Thomas hugged me, something he hadn't done spontaneously in years. I'm going to do better, Mom. We all are. I know you will, sweetheart. You already have. Jennifer approached as Thomas walked away, her eyes red from crying during Victoria's speech. Mom, I've been wanting to tell you something for months, but I didn't know how. You can tell me anything, Jennifer. After everything that happened, after you cut us off and made us face ourselves, I went back to school. I'm getting my teacher certification. Jennifer, that's wonderful. You always wanted to teach. But I gave it up when I got married because my husband said teaching didn't pay enough, and I believed him. I believed that money was more important than doing something I loved. She wiped her eyes. These past 2 years, watching you stand up for yourself and refuse to keep funding our poor choices, it made me realize I'd given up on my own dreams to live someone else's life. What does your husband think about this?
He wasn't happy at first, but then I told him that whether he supported me or not, I was doing it. And you know what? He surprised me. He said he'd never seen me so passionate about anything and that he was proud of me. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. I start student teaching next month. The pay is terrible and I'll be eating a lot of ramen for the next year, but I don't care. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something for me. Michael was the last to approach as the reception wound down and guests began filtering out into the Chicago night. Mom, I have something for you. He handed me an envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside was a check for $127,000. Michael, what? It's every penny you've ever given me, with interest calculated at the current market rate. I've been saving for 18 months to pay you back. Michael, I told you that you didn't need to. I know what you said, but I needed to do this, not for you, but for me. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet and still honor my debts. I looked at the check, this tangible representation of my son's growth and self-respect. I'm going to cash this. Good. And then I'm going to donate it to a scholarship fund for low-income students studying law. Michael smiled. Even better. But I want you to know that this gesture means more to me than the money ever could. You didn't have to do this, but you chose to. That's the difference between obligation and character. You taught me that, Mom. It just took me 40 years to understand the lesson. As I drove home to my condominium that night, I thought about the past 2 years and everything that had changed. My family had been broken by truth and rebuilt through accountability. We were closer now than we'd ever been when we were pretending everything was fine. Victoria was thriving in her career, engaged to a man who respected her for who she'd become rather than who she'd pretended to be. Thomas had started volunteering as a financial literacy instructor for low-income families, teaching others the lessons he'd failed to learn himself until middle age. Jennifer was pursuing her dream of teaching, finally valuing passion over profit. And Michael had learned that true independence meant taking responsibility for your choices, not just celebrating your successes. As for me, I was finally living as myself, not as someone's mother, grandmother, or benefactor, but as Eleanor Whitmore, investor, businesswoman, and person who'd learned that sometimes love means saying no. 3 months after the wedding, I received a call from Marcus Chin. Mrs. Whitmore, I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. Chen Ventures has been approached by several investors who want to know the identity of our silent partner. They've heard rumors about your investment strategy and want to learn from your expertise. Absolutely not. My anonymity is non-negotiable. I understand, but what if we created a mentorship program? You wouldn't have to reveal your identity, but you could teach others your investment philosophy. We could help women and minorities build generational wealth using your strategies. I was quiet for a moment, considering. Tell me more. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a program that would use my investment methodology to help underserved communities build financial security. I would remain anonymous, but my knowledge would become legacy. I'll do it, I said finally, but with one condition. Name it. The first mentorship slot goes to Victoria, not because she's my granddaughter, but because she's proven she has the discipline and intelligence to use this knowledge responsibly. Done. The mentorship program launched 6 months later, and I found a new purpose I'd never expected. Teaching others to build wealth through patience, discipline, and strategic planning gave me satisfaction beyond anything I'd experienced in my 43 years of silent investing. Victoria excelled as a student, eventually becoming a mentor herself. She taught young women that financial independence wasn't about inheritance or luck, but about making smart choices consistently over time. Thomas brought his financial literacy students to the program, creating pathways for people who never imagined they could build wealth. Jennifer incorporated financial education into her teaching curriculum, giving her students tools their parents never had. And Michael provided pro bono legal services to program participants who needed help with contracts, estate planning, and business formation. My family had become partners in creating opportunity instead of merely consuming it. On my 70th birthday, my children and grandchildren threw me a surprise party at my condominium, not the expensive catered affairs they used to plan, but a simple gathering where everyone brought homemade dishes and we ate off paper plates while watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. "Mom," Thomas said, standing to give a toast, "3 years ago, you taught us the hardest lesson we've ever learned. You taught us that love without respect is worthless and help without boundaries is harmful." Jennifer continued, "You showed us that real strength isn't about rescuing people from every difficulty, but about believing in them enough to let them find their own strength." Michael raised his glass. "You proved that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage, and that true power comes from knowing your worth even when others can't see it." Victoria finished the toast, "And you demonstrated that it's never too late to stop living for others and start living for yourself. To Eleanor Whitmore, the silent partner who taught us all to find our voices." As everyone drank to the toast, I looked around the room at these people I loved who'd finally learned to love me back with respect instead of just dependence. "Thank you all," I said quietly, "but I need to correct something Victoria said. I'm not the silent partner anymore." They looked confused. "As of last week, I've transferred my controlling interest in Chen Ventures to a trust that will fund the mentorship program in perpetuity. The silent partner is now a foundation, not a person." "Mom, that's your life's work," Thomas protested, "your legacy." "No, Thomas, you're my legacy, all of you, and what you've become. The money is just money, but the lessons you've learned, the people you've helped, the changes you've made in your own lives, that's what matters." "What will you do now?" Jennifer asked. "Whatever I want," I said with a smile. "For the first time in 70 years, I'm completely free to just be Eleanor. Not Eleanor the provider, or Eleanor the investor, or Eleanor the mother who sacrifices everything. Just Eleanor." "And who is that?" Victoria asked softly. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out." The truth is, being called a burden in my own home was the best thing that ever happened to me. It shattered the comfortable lies I'd been living and forced me to see my family and myself clearly for the first time. I'd spent 67 years being invisible by choice, hiding my success so my family wouldn't feel inadequate, minimizing my achievements so others could feel bigger, sacrificing my own needs so everyone else could thrive. And what did I get for all that selfless sacrifice? I got taken for granted. I got treated like an obligation. I got called a burden by people who'd been living off my generosity for decades.
But here's what I learned. You teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to tolerate. And I'd been teaching my family that my needs didn't matter for so long that they actually believed it. The moment I stopped tolerating disrespect, everything changed. Not immediately and not easily, but fundamentally and permanently. My family learned that love requires respect, that help should build independence, not dependence, that financial support without boundaries creates weakness, not strength, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to keep enabling someone's worst impulses. As for me, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, never too late to set boundaries, never too late to stop being the person everyone expects you to be and start being who you actually are. At 70 years old, I'm finally discovering Eleanor Whitmore, and she's fascinating. She travels now, not to exotic locations, but to small towns where she can teach community workshops on financial literacy. She volunteers at a women's shelter, helping survivors build credit and plan futures. She's learning to paint, badly but joyfully, in a studio apartment she rents specifically for making messes. She has friends who know nothing about her money, who like her for her conversation and her company. She goes to movies alone, eats dinner at restaurants with a book, and occasionally stays in bed until noon just because she can. She's not someone's mother or grandmother first, she's Eleanor, and Eleanor is enough. 2 years after that life-changing engagement party, I received a letter from Victoria. She'd moved to Boston with Marcus, where they were starting a venture capital firm focused on investing in women-owned businesses. The letter read, "Dearest Grandma, I'm writing to tell you that we're expecting a baby in 6 months, a girl. We're naming her Eleanor. Marcus and I have been talking about what kind of parents we want to be, and we keep coming back to the lessons you taught me through the hardest 2 years of my life. We want to teach our daughter that she's valuable for who she is, not what she has, that real love includes accountability, that money is a tool, not an identity, and that the strongest people are those who earn their strength through struggle, not those who inherit comfort without challenge. You gave me all of that by refusing to keep rescuing me from myself, and I want you to know that every day I spend building something real, something earned, something mine, I think of you and the courage it took to let me fail.
Thank you for loving me enough to stop enabling me. Thank you for believing I could be more than I was showing the world. And thank you for teaching me that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money or comfort, but the opportunity to discover their own strength. Your granddaughter, Victoria. P.S. Little Eleanor's college fund is already started. We're contributing monthly, and by the time she's 18, we'll have saved enough to pay for her education ourselves. No loans, no help, no shortcuts. Just 2 parents who learned from the best that real security comes from building it yourself. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of profound satisfaction. This was what success looked like. Not the $47 million I'd built over 4 decades, but this, a granddaughter who'd learned the lessons I'd spent a lifetime trying to teach, a family that had been broken by truth and rebuilt through accountability, a legacy that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. That evening, I called Victoria. "I got your letter. I was hoping you would." Her voice was warm, free of the entitlement and defensiveness that had characterized our conversations 2 years earlier. "What did you think?" "I think you're going to be an excellent mother. I learned from the best." "You learned from your mistakes, Victoria. That's better than learning from perfection." "Grandma, can I ask you something? When you cut me off 2 years ago, were you scared that I'd fail completely, that I'd never recover?" I thought about the question carefully. Yes, I was terrified, but I was more terrified of what would happen if I didn't. If I kept enabling you, you'd have spent your whole life as a beautiful, charming, fundamentally hollow person, and that would have been a tragedy. Would you have let me fail? Completely, I mean?
Homeless, destitute, destroyed? No, I would have caught you before you hit rock bottom, but I would have made you climb back up yourself. She laughed. That's what I thought. That's what I'm going to do with little Eleanor. Give her enough rope to learn from mistakes, but not enough to hang herself. That's called good parenting, sweetheart. As I sit here now, looking back on 70 years of life, I realize that the story of how I became the burden is really the story of how I found myself. For decades, I lived quietly, invisibly, sacrificing my own needs and hiding my own success so others could feel comfortable. I was the silent partner, not just in business, but in my own life. Present but unacknowledged, powerful but invisible, essential but taken for granted. Then one night, my granddaughter called me a burden in my own home, and everything changed. Not because I suddenly became wealthy or powerful, I'd always been those things, but because I finally decided to stop hiding who I was to make other people comfortable. I stopped being silent. And in finding my voice, I helped my family find theirs. Not voices of entitlement or dependence, but voices of strength, accountability, and earned self-respect. The final lesson I learned through all of this is simple but profound. You can't pour from an empty cup. For 67 years, I poured everything I had into other people's lives. My time, my money, my energy, my dreams. I sacrificed and saved and went without so they could have more, and I told myself that was love. But it wasn't love, it was fear. Fear that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop being valued. Fear that if I stopped giving, I'd stop being loved. Fear that my worth was measured entirely by what I could provide to others. The truth is, my family didn't need a bank, they needed a person. They needed someone who loved them enough to let them struggle, who believed in them enough to let them fail, who respected them enough to hold them accountable. They needed Eleanor Whitmore, not an ATM machine in elderly woman's clothing. So here's what I want you to know, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. If you're being taken for granted, stop allowing it. If you're sacrificing yourself to keep others comfortable, stop doing it. If you're hiding who you really are because you're afraid people won't love the real you, stop hiding. Because the people who only love you for what you provide aren't loving you at all. They're loving your utility, and you deserve better than being someone's convenient resource. Set boundaries, demand respect, refuse to keep enabling behavior that hurts both you and the people you're trying to help. It won't be easy. People will be angry. They'll call you selfish, cruel, unreasonable. They'll accuse you of changing, of becoming hard, of not being the person they thought you were. And they'll be right. You will change. You will become harder. Harder to manipulate, harder to take advantage of, harder to guilt into sacrificing yourself. But you'll also become freer, happier, more authentically yourself. And the people who truly love you, the ones worth keeping in your life, will eventually realize that the real you is better than the pretend you ever was. Today, I'm 72 years old. I live in a beautiful condominium overlooking Lake Michigan. I have $43 million in various investments. I've given away $4 million to the Mentorship Foundation and various causes I believe in. I have 3 children who call me regularly just to talk, not to ask for money. I have 4 grandchildren who respect me, not for my wealth, but for my wisdom and my willingness to let them learn their own lessons. And I have myself, finally, completely, unapologetically myself. Was it worth it? Being called a burden in my own home, having my family discover I was secretly wealthy, cutting them off and forcing them to face themselves? Absolutely, because sometimes the only way to save the people you love is to stop rescuing them. Sometimes the only way to teach respect is to demand it.
And sometimes the only way to find yourself is to stop being who everyone else needs you to be. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with someone out there who's been living silently, sacrificing endlessly, and wondering why they feel so empty despite giving so much. You're not a burden. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share your own story in the comments below.